people up to the age of 35 are at the greatest risk for violence. And so I've historically focused mostly on youth, both because they tend to get exposed quite early, around the age of 13 to 15, 12 to 15 sometimes, and then move into violence a bit later, 19, 20, 21. But those ideas start to form. They start to be exposed quite early. But over the last year or two, really during the pandemic, the data is looking really different. And nobody really knows yet whether this is a pandemic bubble. Is it a blip in the data? Or is this a new normal? Where, I think the average age of the people arrested on January 6th was in the 40s, so a much older group of people who are mobilized. And certainly that's what we're seeing as well with some of the anti-government extremism, is that this is attracting more middle-aged men, returning veterans, other people who have actually lived longer than the younger group of people who we typically tend to think of as most in need of intervention. So we created these resources for parents to teach them about what are some common red flags or warning signs, things to look out for, but also how to feel more empowered to engage. So when we did focus groups with parents on the first draft of the guide, they said, it was really interesting, they said, we don't want to know just how to recognize the risks. We want to know how to build more resilient kids. And so we went back to the literature and learned about, kind of parenting tactics that can help you build more positive identity for kids, more a sense of greater inclusion, and help them be less vulnerable to some of that propaganda. Then we tested the guide, I should say, with parents, with 750 parents and caregivers. And we learned a lot of interesting things. So we learned that it only takes 7 minutes of reading on average for parents to improve their ability to recognize warning signs and to feel more empowered. Mothers learned more than fathers. That's also kind of interesting. They knew more coming in. They read the guide for longer and they learned more. But we also learned that it worked for everybody, except on one measure. The most highly educated group of parents did not improve their ability to recognize online disinformation. The reason is because they came in so much more confident than everybody else that they could already do it. And then they got less confident when they realized how tricky kind of the online spaces are where kids encounter this. So we took that as a win because we corrected their overconfidence. But we also realized those parents are never going to reach out for resources on their own. They don't think they need it. And so that led us now to develop a whole sort of marketing strategy of how we get these tools out in front of parents that might not otherwise reach out for the help. So that's one way that we're doing it. There are a lot of other ways that we are working, and there's organizations now setting up a portal for parents and caregivers. There's a group that, probably Parents for Peace, that advises parents. There are a lot more resources now in this country and more emerging than there used to be, but it's still, compared to any other crisis that your child might go through, depression or anxiety, mental health concerns, eating disorders, addiction, self-harm, suicide, there would be a 1-800 number to call. There'd be therapists who know what to do. There would be doctors who could refer you to therapists who knew what to do. There would be treatment centers, people to provide assessments. How bad is the situation? And again, back to countries like Germany, they have mobile advisory centers that do just that. And so, there's a whole different level. We should not be leaving families on their own to essentially call up a professor, which is what happens to me. We get calls from, grandparents, siblings, parents, teachers, principals, defense attorneys, all kinds of people who want to know what are the pathways to de-radicalization and how can they get help for somebody. And honestly, by the time they've Googled and found me, just a professor, there's not much I can do, because it's much, much harder to de-radicalize someone than it is to prevent them from going down that pathway to begin with. So for children, for young people, a lot of it is the same kinds of warning signs that you would see with other types of problems that they might have. So withdrawal from their friends, a sense of secrecy, more isolated, spending more and more time online. We've heard from a mother who heard her son expressing extreme misogyny out of the blue during the pandemic, right? Where did that come from? And then unable to talk to him about it because she wasn't regarded anymore as a person who could have that conversation with him. So by him. So, all strange changes in behavior, right? Changes in the kinds of things you say. If they're starting to talk about, conspiracy theories about COVID or, strange ideas that that I didn't get from you, your family, or from school, what we suggest is that that's an opening to express curiosity about where they heard it. Because it doesn't say your kid is becoming an extremist or even becoming radicalized, but it tells you that they're exposed to something online, probably, or among their friendship group that is bad content, and that is, potentially exposing them to other bad content. And the last thing I'll say about that is there is one thing that parents can do that makes things worse, and that's react with shame and to shame their children. And we often find that parents do react that way. They hear their children say something. It's very hard, right, to not react with anger or with shame or with horror. And what we know from research is that when you react that way, it tends to drive children and teens online further, where that shame can be easily converted to anger. And that can draw them further in. They find a community there who says, oh, your parents are just triggered snowflakes who can't take a joke. And so, it's very, very difficult. We suggest that people try to react with curiosity, trying to understand where they heard it. Why do you think it's funny? And then go from there, But shame is the reaction that can open up pathways that can make things worse. On the de-radicalization side, I'm not very optimistic. So it can be done, and we have terrific stories about it being done, and we have terrific organizations that do that work. Life After Hate and Exit Germany, Exit Sweden, and other groups that work therapeutically, typically, and one-on-one. So you really have to work with an individual. They often need treatment. They need job counseling. They need, depending on how long they've been down that pathway, right? So someone who's really become and been actively engaged as a violent extremist, a hardliner, is a re-entry. It's a rehabilitation project that is not scalable and that is very difficult to initiate. So, it can be done. It certainly can be done when someone's ready to come out of those movements. And when they're ready to come out, they need help and they need support. And that's what a lot of these terrific organizations do. But the most effective thing that we have found is called pre-bunking or attitudinal inoculation in the literature, which is, it's a media literacy technique that teaches people. It gives them actually a microdose of the propaganda. It's a scripted approach. We do it in video form, typically, animated, but also acted videos. We've done it in as short as 30 seconds and in the videos because we're trying to see whether can you get them into a length of time that could run as an advertisement, let's say, or could be on social media. And it turns out you can. We've done much longer videos as well and built curriculum around them. But you can do it in a pretty short amount of time. People don't like to find out they're being manipulated. Nobody likes to find that out, right? Especially teenagers. So, if you can teach them that there are actors out there trying to make you believe things that are not even in your own self-interest, but are promoting the ideologies and the worldviews that they want to succeed. And here's how it works. We're not telling you what to think, right? You can think whatever you want, but we want you to have all the tools to be equipped to make your own decisions. And when you teach them, there's all these kinds of tactics out there that are used to try to persuade you. And here's what one looks like. Here's an example of it. When you see information about vaccines, vaccine injury, vaccines causing injury, those videos often have a lot of Hollywood tactics in them, like scary music that makes you feel anxious, or colors that induce they look like vomit, or oversized needles that nobody uses anymore that are from like the 1950s, and crying babies, right? There's all kinds of things that are used that evoke a sense of fear and anxiety while they give you a bunch of misinformation or disinformation about the vaccine that's patently untrue. And so those are manipulative tactics, right? So some of this is sort of straight out of advertising 101 marketing tactics that persuade people. And we know those tactics are effective. They've worked in the advertising world for decades, but people can be taught to recognize them. And it will take time, but it took us a while to get here too. And I think that's, I think it's important to remember, we didn't just collapse in 2 years, right? We didn't get to this place. This was a slow erosion of trust, of cohesion, of relationships and of our ability to talk to each other even, as part of that fertile ground, and a slow and gradual explosion of hateful propaganda and speech online and expressions of hate in visual form, in audio form, and a whole new world and ecosystem that we haven't quite figured out. There was a whole generation of kids who are now my college students and a little older than that, who never learned anything about internet privacy or even how to protect themselves from predators online, right? They really didn't get anything. And then we introduced digital communications classes. So most fourth or fifth graders in this country, I think, get a digital communications class, and it teaches them about internet safety, about privacy, about protecting yourself from bad actors online, and about how to be a good citizen online, like not to bully others, basically. But it doesn't teach them anything about source integrity or disinformation or propaganda or any kind of bad content that they might encounter yet. I bet it will. Within 4 or 5 years, I expect we'll have it because teachers know it's a problem. Librarians know it's a problem, right? We're worried about how do they suss out, the true from false. How much worse is that going to get as we get into deep fake videos, right? We have to have better skills at detecting this. I don't like to leave everybody on a bad note, and I really am an optimist, and I think that we can do this. I have faith in the ability of the country to come out of this, but it can't. It's not going to happen on its own. I try not to be too alarmist. I really do, but I think if we don't intervene, this is really where I feel a sense of urgency. If we don't intervene in a significant, substantial, scalable way in healing communities and in building resilience to disinformation and propaganda and conspiracy theories and the extremist fringe, I really don't think we get off that list of backsliding democracies in the restorative way. I think we end up in the collapse direction. I don't see how we couldn't. I don't know any other answer in the data about how countries get off that list. It's not going to happen by, just with a bunch of wishes, right? I mean, we can't just wave a magic eraser and get our way out of this mess without intervention. We have to do something. I'm not saying my something is the right solution, but I would like a lot of different investments, a lot of different attempts to fix this that build on communities and that want us to kind of build social cohesion and reduce polarization and reduce that fertile ground as part of a broader strategy to kind of build healthier and restorative democracy.